have a quorum. I think we're battling the smells of barbecue and everybody wants to get the lunch. But I'm going to try to gavel us in because we have a great and busy and packed agenda today. So I want to make sure we get started. So good wait, I guess I have to officially hit that. There you go. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Charles Allen. I am the COG board chair, and I'd like to call the February meeting of the COG board of directors to order. Thanks everybody for being able to join us today. It is fantastic to have everybody in person and to see you all. First, we start our meetings with the Pledge of Allegiance. So if everybody will join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all very much. On to today's meeting. As a reminder, our meeting's audio and video are being live streamed on the COG website. I also mentioned the barbecue, so let me highlight the lunch for today's meeting. It is from Due South, which is located in Yards Park in DC. It used to be a great part of Ward 6 until redistricting, so now it's in the great Ward 8, but it didn't move. But it's a fantastic place. The executive chef is Rusty Holman. He grew up in Arkansas and North Carolina. Developed a passion for Southern cuisine, one that was shared by his family, and Chef Rusty and his team strive to create a local Southern escape through good food, hospitality, and service. Their mission is to make every guest feel at home, and I hope you enjoy today's lunch as we continue to work to support our local restaurants around the region during our meetings. And they're right near the ballpark in Yards Park, so if you ever head that way, check them out in person. Also included in this month's board packet is a link to the COG board member handbook. This is a great resource for both our new and returning board members on the roles and responsibilities of our COG board members, the structure of our boards and committees, and COG's priorities and focus areas. It also includes a copy of the bylaws and rules of procedure. And also on the dais in front of you, you should have a copy of this year's board of directors in addition to the COG member benefits document. Before we get started, I also want to take a moment to welcome any of our new COG board members joining us for the first time. We recognize a lot of folks in January. Is there anybody who's here today that wasn't here in January that wants to introduce themselves? Yes. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ingrid Watson, and I proudly serve as a council member for Prince George's County Council.
Excellent. Welcome, council member. Great to meet you. Anybody else? Tomas?
Hello, everybody. Tomas Talamante, and I serve as Mayor Bowser's Director of Intergovernmental Affairs. So very nice to see everybody. Thank you.
Good to see you. All right. I think we've got everybody else covered. All right. Excellent. Next, we're going to move to agenda item number 3, which is the Executive Director's report. I'm going to turn it over to Executive Director Clark Mercer to give his updates for this report. Mr. Mercer.
Right. Thank you, Chair, and I will be brief. So welcome, everybody. Grant money that's available to your localities for transportation. Our Transportation Planning Board is accepting applications for FY25 for transportation, land use connections, and regional roadway safety programs. So $80,000 is available for technical assistance and up to $100,000 for design projects, and the deadline is March 8th. This will be in your email after the meeting with information, but alert your transportation folks to get their applications in. Our public safety team, led by Scott Boggs, Scott, wave your hand, has been busy and got a few updates. One that I want to invite you all to participate in is a tabletop exercise on March 15th. And the topic is an attack on our grid and electrical system. The exercise will be held for the Emergency Preparedness Council, also known as the EPC. And this is a follow-up from a similar part 1 of the exercise with your chief administrative officers and subject matter experts last fall. So Scott has a whole roster of these types of exercises that he works with the region on, and this is one that would be appropriate if you would like to participate. So we'll have that information in a follow-up email. We have a public safety leadership training seminar application that's also open, and it's a workshop that enhances professional development skills in the fields of public safety, health, emergency management, IT, and homeland security. So those application windows open, and it's for the spring of 2024. So again, when you get this information, if you can forward it to your CAO and appropriate department heads, that's a very good program that Scott's teams runs. The Water Resources team wanted me to note, you may have heard this on WAMU, there's a public service campaign going on about winter salting. Hopefully we are getting that window's getting behind us, we shall see, but it's directing listeners to COG's Salt Smart webpage for tips on how to salt efficiently. These are our roads, not your lunches. That was a joke. I was just did that one on the fly. And protect water quality. Yeah, right. Point in time count occurred a couple weeks ago. So we run the back end data for that and the report with all of your localities. So for those of you who participated, thank you. Hillary Chapman runs our housing team. A big thank you to her. She and I participated in the downtown district count. Councilman from DC, Charles White, was there. Robert White, sorry, was there. And that data from the count is compiled and analyzed in our regional report, which is released later this spring. COG has its newest podcast up on fair housing, and thank you to Vice Chair Rodney Lusk for participating. And this is a good one. It's really Fair Housing 101. So it's a good resource for you and your colleagues and constituents that want to learn more about this important topic and how our region is working together to help create more inclusive communities. And lastly, just want to recognize that a great friend and supporter of COG, the former City of Fairfax Mayor John Mason, passed away last week at the age of 89. He served on the Fairfax Council from 86 to 90 and was mayor from 1990 to 2002. Although he also did quite a bit in the region here at COG. He was our TPB chair, as well as our COG corporate president. And he really helped with some of our long-term visioning, particularly around regional activity centers. So I wanted to recognize his service to Fairfax and the region. And that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mercer, and thank you very much for sharing that news to honor that. Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
I apologize. Yes, go ahead.
No, just quickly, I just would like to emphasize the tabletop exercise that's coming out and how important I think that is. If you think about it, one person with a big gun can take out a transmission station. You take out 5, the whole region's down, probably for weeks. And where would we be if that would happen? I think it's really important to do this tabletop because how unlikely is that to happen? Not as unlikely as we would like. So I think it's really important and something we really need to be thinking about. We don't want to be caught flat-footed in the middle of a major emergency that we haven't really thought through. So just encouraging people to participate. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Garvey.
Mr. Chair, hi, Dave Snyder. I just wanted to underscore
Mr.
what
Snyder.
Libby said a minute ago. It's very important for elected officials to be involved. Well, Homeland Security tends to be viewed as a technical issue and one for only the security people. The fact of the matter is that elected officials are going to play a key role. So please, please consider attending that tabletop exercise. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. All right, with those 2 endorsements, Mr. Mercer, you want to repeat the dates for that tabletop exercise?
I do want to do that. March 15th. And we'll make sure that information is at the top of your emails when we have a summary that goes out after the meeting.
Fantastic.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, let me move to agenda item number 4, which is amendments to the agenda. Actually, we do have one amendment to today's agenda. I want to move to add an additional item to the end of the agenda to consider Resolution R11, 2024 on the slots and perimeter rule at DCA. Everyone should have a copy of that by email. There's also printed copies at everyone's desk in front of you. So that way you have a chance to review this before this comes up later at the agenda, but it's an addition that we're adding to the agenda, assuming that I have a second to my motion.
A second, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lusk. There's a second. Are there any additional amendments to today's agenda? And not seeing any, let me call just a vote to amend the agenda. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And the ayes have it. Thank you. So the motion for our agenda now passes. And again, that'll come up later in our meeting. Next, we move to agenda item number 5, which is to approve the minutes from the January 10th board meeting. Let me go ahead and make that motion to approve the minutes from our January 10 meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. I appreciate the second. Let me turn to see if there's any discussion on the minutes. And seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And the ayes have it. All right, next, agenda item number 6. Look at us flying. The consent agenda. We have one resolution on the consent agenda today authorizing COG to procure and enter into a contract to purchase tow vehicles. You can review this resolution on page 16 of your board packet. Let me make a motion now to approve the consent agenda. Is there a second?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
I hear a second, Mr. Lusk. Thank you very much. Is there any discussion on the consent agenda?
I'm sorry.
Yes, Ms. Randall.
We are going really quickly, and your addition to the agenda. Can you just do, that went right past me and it just
Sure.
hit me out of a sudden. Can you just do what that addition was again? On the slot,
Absolutely.
I think it was a slots discussion.
Yes, so
I just keyed in. I apologize.
no problem at all. I'll jump backwards just for a moment on this, and then we'll come back to the motion that's on the table. So Chairman Mendelson asked for a resolution to be added to the agenda today. This is a consistent agenda, a consistent resolution with something that COG has actually passed twice previously. But I think due to the timeliness of some of the conversation that's taking place around the slots and perimeter at DCA, his interest was in having COG speak to it one more time. So the resolution was drafted this morning. It was emailed out to everybody. Procedurally, we would put it on under new business. And so what I wanted to do is make sure that everyone had a copy of it in front of them and had it in advance.
Okay, all right.
Filled in at the end of the agenda, so everyone has a chance to kind of read it.
I'm sorry I missed that. Thank you very much.
No problem. I appreciate it. All right, so I'm going to jump back to the consent agenda. And so let me make sure I am following all my rules and procedures here. So I had made a motion. Mr. Lusk had seconded that motion. And so I was turning to see if there's any discussion on the consent agenda before I call for a vote for that. All right, and hearing none, all those in favor of the consent agenda, please say aye. Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Thank you very much. Next, we're going to move to agenda item number 7, our fiscal year 2024 second quarter financial report. For our next item, we're joined by COG Corporate Secretary Treasurer Michael O'Connor and COG CFO Julie Mussog to provide the fiscal year 2024 second quarter financial report. So let me turn it over to Mr. O'Connor.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Happy Valentine's to everyone. You're going to love this financial report. The Q2 financial report for fiscal year 2024 is in your board packet starting on page 18, showing the results for the quarter that ended December 31st, 2023. This is an interim unaudited report prepared by management. I have reviewed the financial information with Ms. Mussog, COG's Chief Financial Officer, and will now turn it over to her to provide additional details and take questions.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I am happy to report that overall COG remains financially healthy and the board designated reserves are funded at 100%. We are tracking to budgeted revenues and in fact have some upside on the revenues due to higher than budgeted REIT dividend and investment income. Expenses are tracking lower than budget primarily due to some position vacancies and lower to date consulting expenses that are usually higher in the second half of the year. Not reflected in the 6 months to date statements presented here is over $200,000 that was billed in January for the cooperative purchasing program. So for the 4th year in a row, the program will not need any subsidy from COG general funds. And in fact, we'll be able to generate some general funds for revenue after expenses. The board memo has additional details on a program level basis, but overall, there are no concerns with program funding at this time. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Mr. O'Connor and Ms. Mussog. Are there any questions that folks have that they'd like to ask? All right, and seeing none. Any comments, questions? Last call. All right, thank you all very much. We don't have to take an action on that one, so there you go. Next, we'll move to agenda item number 8, which is our regional legislative update. For our next item, Monica Nunez is going to highlight a few legislative updates related to COG priorities in the current state and federal legislative sessions. Monica, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you. At last month's board meeting, you'll remember the COG board adopted the set of 2024 legislative priorities. That's also in your board packet again today. So that is the set of priorities that COG staff and policy committees use to guide our legislative advocacy and efforts throughout sessions and throughout the year. I wanted to highlight a few of the top priorities we are currently tracking. The first is Metro funding. There's currently legislation in Maryland and Virginia to allocate additional operating funding for Metro in FY25 and 26. As you know, the COG board has been supporting this and we are watching it closely. In Virginia, there's currently budget amendments in the House and Senate to allocate additional funds for FY25 and 26. There's also a budget amendment to provide a 2-year suspension of the 3% annual cap on operating assistance increases. So we are watching all of those as it moves forward. In Virginia, there's also active legislation to conduct a legislative study on long-term sustainable funding and cost containment controls for the transit systems in Northern Virginia. So we'll continue to track that. In Maryland, the governor included additional metro funding in his proposed budget, so that continues to move forward. There's also legislation filed to temporarily repeal the 3% operating assistance cap in Maryland. We're working closely with delegates and senators representing our region in both Maryland and Virginia, and also in the district to ensure that this moves forward for the coming fiscal years. A couple other issues I wanted to highlight on water. We continue to work with our water utilities and partners to obtain funding for a study that's being done through the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which is a feasibility study of the region's water supply, including identification of a second water source. You may recall we've expressed support of this in the past. Congress authorized this study in December, and we're working to make sure that the study is included in the final energy and water bill. The deadline for that is March 1st, so we should be hopefully having good news soon. On the waterfront, we're also closely monitoring some bills in both Virginia and Maryland that's related to PFAS levels. Those are the long-lasting chemicals, which are also found in water. So looking into those. On the climate and energy side, there's one bill I wanted to highlight on the Maryland side, which is the Department of Labor as part of the Maryland Building Performance Standards. And this is looking at requirements that new buildings and significant improvements to building and structures meet water and space heating demands of the building without the use of fossil fuels. So it's looking to increase the energy conservation requirements. Lastly, I wanted to highlight a couple of priorities out of our farm committee, which focuses on food security and agriculture. The top 2 priorities they're tracking right now is the 2024 Farm Bill at the federal level, which includes expansion of different food security benefits, but one that we are always in support of is the SNAP benefits. And they're also closely tracking support of the child tax credit and expansion of that. And there's currently legislation on that at the federal level, in addition to Maryland, DC, and Virginia. And that's the conclusion of my report, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'll note this is the idea behind this was to provide it for information purposes. So if we have detailed policy and legislative questions, might be best to follow up with Ms. Nunez afterwards. But I will say if there are any quick questions for Ms. Nunez at this stage. All right, seeing none. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that. All right, we're going to move to agenda item number 9 now, which is the federal workforce in the region. So the federal workforce in the Metropolitan Washington region is something we've all talked about quite a bit here. Unfortunately, Deputy Director Miller, who we'd previously scheduled, is unable to join us today, but the board will be briefed by the U.S. Office of Management and Budget Associate Director Lauren DeJonge Schulman. If I got close, please help correct me.
That was, some of those syllables were there.
All right, some of them were there.
Lauren DeJonge-Schulman. No, don't worry about it. It happens all the time.
I appreciate it. So you're going to help brief us on the actions at the U.S. Office of Management and Budget to help manage the federal workforce, the impacts to our regional economy. I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm sure after your presentation, I'm sure we'll have a few questions to be able to help talk to you. And for folks, there's no action item that comes out of this. It's a presentation and a discussion and some questions for everybody. But thank you very much. Let me turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, and thanks so much for having me. And I know many of you know my boss, Jason Miller. He sends his greetings and apologies for not being here. I would say that I have better jokes, but my 9-year-old tells me that I absolutely do not. So we'll leave you to judge that based on how the discussion goes today. So I get the exciting role of working with and for the federal workforce every day. And one of my favorite parts of my job is something that I know many of you are very familiar with, is the responsibilities and the opportunity of supporting and empowering the nation's largest workforce, one of the region's largest workforces, that covers anything from cemetery management to nuclear physics to vaccine research to land management, air traffic control. Anything in the economy is represented in the federal workforce in some way. And with that comes a diversity of challenges, but also the diversity of impacts, because anytime we try to take a lead on something in the federal government, we try something new, we reform, that ends up having an impact not only on the national workforce as a whole, but certainly the regions that we partner with like all of you every day. But across all of those roles, whether that be, again, the cemetery management, the nuclear physicists, the folks who are doing air traffic control, and any number of other things, they've got one imperative that you all feel all the time, and that is serving the public, delivering for the American people. They all signed up and swore on day one that they would be doing that no matter what the role ended up being. And we are so lucky to have millions of Americans who do that every day, about 250,000 in this general region. And if you look at state across the tri-state area, about 500K, a little bit less than that, depending on how you measure. And about 200,000 of folks enter the workforce in the federal government every year. So we've got an opportunity to refresh and renew talent with that on an ongoing basis. But in order to deliver on that North Star of delivering for the American people, President Biden has made really clear, tells us all the time that that workforce needs to be strong, it needs to be empowered, and we as the federal government have to be a model employer. And that means a lot of things to different people, but I'll list a couple of things for us. One is around high employee engagement, folks who are delighted to be there, who feel privileged to serve and are getting the most out of those opportunities and see that service. We actually have had 5-year highs in our engagement scores across the federal government as of last year, which is an incredible success for us and something we're excited on capitalizing on. And second is around a commitment to protect that workforce and respect workers' rights. Day one, first week of the administration, President Biden's one of his first executive orders was on protecting the federal workforce. We have issued, or I'm sorry, we're about to issue a new rule on protecting the civil servants as related to some of the actions of the prior administration around Schedule F. And you've seen a number of actions in between around protecting and sustaining federal workforce and making sure that workers' rights are represented there. Third up is obviously we all need, and you all see this in your jurisdictions too, the strong systems to hire, retain, and develop people to serve all of our nation's critical missions. And those are things that we're familiar with and things that are growing and new to all of us all the time. From the infrastructure hiring that we did over the past few years, a huge surge in that work, to something new over the past few months is around our national artificial intelligence talent surge. Not just the data scientists, not just the machine learning experts, but the lawyers, the program managers, the designers, everyone else who is impacted by and understands AI. And the last but not least, of course, a workforce that looks like America, that represents America across the country. And we have done a number of initiatives in this space, from expanding our paid internships, making sure we have greater partnerships with regional institutions, minority serving institutions, and new programs and registered apprenticeships so that we're building the skills that we need to see in that federal workforce going forward. This is an imperative because the president reminds us all the time that the federal workforce is the backbone of our government. We couldn't get it done without them, and we rely on them to be able to deliver on our mission for Americans every day. And to successfully deliver for Americans, we have to make sure our agencies have the necessary resources to do that whole talent cycle, attracting, retaining, developing, putting them in the right roles, and holding them accountable for that. And you can see this in our budgets, which over the past 2 years have provided some historic pay raises. This year was 5.2%, last year was 4.6% for civil servants across the country. And all the changes that we've made in pay reform overall, whether it be the pay equity rule that was announced a few weeks ago, the decision to make all federal jobs at least at a living wage of $15 an hour, and several initiatives to streamline and bolster federal compensation, focusing on the tech workforce, cyber, healthcare, and other things. But we all experienced, I know you all felt this in your jurisdictions, and we very much felt it in the federal workforce, that COVID-19 and the pandemic posed a lot of challenges for us in the federal workforce in the region and nationwide. But we also saw that as an opportunity, got to make lemonade out of lemons, to show Americans that government can deliver for them through all kinds of adversity. And that goes from delivering millions of vaccines and tests to the public, helping fuel our economic recovery, helping rebuild the nation's infrastructure, and working with all of you to help streamline government services. And thanks to all the work that was done over that period, COVID-19 does not play a role as a key driver in our work environments in the federal government today. But with that comes a requirement to learn from that period. That was an incredibly difficult one, but one that gave us this opportunity to learn from the resiliency and the flexibility that we experienced in the federal workforce and in all workforces across the country. And over the past few years, you've seen, I'm seeing that in your jurisdictions and in your colleagues and across the region, that federal agencies have done a lot to adjust their workplace policies, to adjust how and where and with what tools that they work, and how they collaborate with one another and with regional partners to take advantage of all the flexibilities that we learned about or we took more advantage of in that period. And coming out of that time, we wanted to make sure that not only we were thinking about learning those lessons, that we made a concerted effort to actually study what is the work environment that makes sense for us and sets us up for strong, healthy institutions, high-performing institutions, and ones that deliver for the American people on a continuously improving basis. So last spring, OMB does what it does. We issued a guidance memo telling agencies, all right, we want you to focus on this, come up with new work environment plans that take advantage of and learn from all that we experienced during the pandemic, create some measures to understand what makes you a healthy and high-performing organization, and to, as a part of that, make sure that you are reflecting the current environment, getting your headquarters staff back in the office for meaningful in-person work, to take advantage of the benefits of in-person while also taking advantage of the benefits of that flexible work that we all experience there. And agencies have, over the course of after they developed their plans, last fall and now or into the winter, they've started to begin executing on plans to reach a more sustainable and durable posture that reflects all of those lessons. Our marker for success there is what we say, you're gonna hear me say this a lot, balanced posture. So we're, for headquarters workers as an example, spending about half the time on average in the office and half the time getting access to those flexible schedules. So they're making the most of the work that you can do around learning and mentorship and collaboration when they're together, and that they are using the flexible tools that we saw over the pandemic in order to take advantage of that and allow us to recruit and retain the talent that we need. So today, nearly all agencies either have implemented or are implementing policy frameworks that get them towards those objectives. It is not an easy process. A 2 million person workforce having to do these sorts of changes, that is a significant move over the course of the last year. And I know you all feel this in your jurisdictions too. But this approach that we think generally mirrors what the private sector is doing, about that half-time balance of in-person time, making the most of that, and half-time using those flexibilities, with variations from folks who are doing call centers to folks who are doing passports, those who need to be in person versus those who can do a lot of their work more flexibly. We think, and evidence supports this, that is having that balance helps with our organizational health, helps with our performance of our organizations, and helps us deliver better, whether that be around making sure new employees feel onboarded into the mission, making sure that we take best advantage of innovating together and working on hard problems together. And we also take advantage of some of those distributed tools that we have advanced over the past few years. But that is not without challenges, and I know all of you feel this amongst your colleagues and workforces every day, whether that be testing the new rhythms of work. Do we want to have core days? What kind of technology do we need? Do we use Teams? Do we use Zoom? Still can't decide that in my office right now. Updating and investing in buildings and workspaces that work for the kind of work that we do. Not just all cubes, not just all collaborative spaces, but things that are a mix in between, and also that maximizes the best use of our federal footprint. A lot of myth busting. When folks stay home for a couple of years, it takes them a while to get over, like, what was it like to commute every day? I know Randy's up after me. How do I use my Metro card again? What do I do in order to make sure that I stay on time as I'm commuting? There's a lot of that myth busting goes on, and we've had great partners with WMATA to understand what it takes for folks to feel comfortable and excited to get back into, or commuting back into the office on a day-to-day basis. And then of course, supporting our managers and leaders to be able to manage and lead hybrid teams. It's not the same as being in person all the time. It is not the same as managing a remote team. This takes skills that not all of us are great at and are learning at right now. So how do we make sure our managers are equipped for that? And then finally, just right sizing the federal footprint that's associated with that. Do we need all of the office space that we had 10 years ago in order to serve the American people, or do we need to have it set up in the same way? So I know that we are all experiencing challenges like that across all of our jurisdictions and our workforces and our colleagues, and I'd love to hear thoughts and questions on that, but I also want to stop and take a couple of questions as well. But I know that since Randy's after me, he'll have a better show.
Well, I have a hunch people want to stick with you for a little bit
right,
before
let's figure
as
out.
excited as we are to have Randy here. This is informational, so there's no action that this body is taking, but we are going to move to some questions and discussion. I was going to start with just a couple of quick questions and then certainly turn to colleagues. As I listened to the presentation, one of the things that struck me is talking about where OMB thinks the goal is.
Yeah.
And at least my ears heard you say the goal to achieve is a roughly 50-50 split between in-person and telework. And I don't find that to be the goal for a lot of others. Is that the stated goal of OMB to achieve, and understanding you're going to have variations on either side of that, but is your goal to reach 50-50?
I'm going to slightly rephrase that, but that's a good starting question. So agencies at the headquarters level, on average, that's what they're pursuing, as what they see. This is like the benefit that allows us to get the benefit out of that in-person time while also getting the benefit out of that flexible time that you might do at home, coffee shops around the country, inspecting railroads, whatever the role is. The thing I want to make clear, though, on that is it's not necessarily that I, Lauren, am spending 2.5 days in the office once a week. It may be that over time, we see some teams that are much more in-office heavy, some teams that are a bit more flexible heavy, depending on the nature of their work, and some that varies over the course of the year when you may have an incredibly busy season, like around budgets for my colleagues, or other things that demand that you get together and have more intensive in-person periods. So I think that balance is more of an overarching goal for agencies, but one that they have a huge amount of diversity in how they're implementing, with some setting policies like the VA at, I think it's either 5 or 6 days per pay period for every 2 weeks in person, and others saying, like, we have a general goal of what we want to do in terms of being together, but we're going to use our practices and our norms in order to get there by requiring training be in person or having a core day or onboarding is in person. And we're going to kind of generally get to that by doing it based on our activities.
Okay. I would at least personally skew greater than 50-50 in person. But how do you evaluate that? I think that's one of the questions probably we all have is, are we at 50-50 currently? Because that doesn't feel like we are. And how does OMB evaluate when those metrics or when those goals are being hit?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of context. So right now, the federal workforce that is about 2 million folks, a little over 2 million folks, only about half of them are eligible to telework at all. So half of that workforce is doing jobs in person of all kinds of jobs. And that's in the DC, the DMV region, but also across the country. Across the country, like just looking at the entire basis of this, our estimates right now, because our data isn't perfect, so I'm going to have like 7 caveats here. Our estimates is that about 80% of federal work is done in person across the country. In the DC region, the DMV region, it's less than that. It's probably in I would say slightly different way to look at it than in the region, just based on headquarters. Again, our best estimate is probably about a little less than 2/3 of work is conducted in person. But again, this is an estimate based on what we receive from agencies, and the agencies themselves are the best source of what is actually going on day to day within their headquarters. And all of this is varying over time for a number of reasons. One, just like the kind of seasonality that I talked about, but also agencies are in different places in terms of their implementation. Many of them moved on policies last fall and into the winter, saying like, we are going to all at once have a posture of X days in the office. Others said, we have this general goal over time, but we want to start with our senior leaders first, or we want to do this in phases based on team, so that certain teams are coming back in on certain days and see how that works out. And then others are doing it based on some of their facilities where they know that they need to upgrade some things, whether it be technology or space or something else. So over time, they have started to move back in person. You've seen over the course, I'm assuming you've seen, you probably don't follow this news as much as I do, but if you do, you've probably seen over at least the past few weeks announcements from the Social Security, from SSA, Social Security, Department of Justice, Department of Transportation, USAID, Veterans Affairs. All of them have over the past month, and some of those a little bit further back, made bigger policy announcements of what their overall goal is and their timeline by which they are implementing that. So some of them are I don't say done implementing because this is an ongoing monitoring basis. Others are like further down the path of maturity. Others are close starting that over the next couple of weeks. I started a few weeks ago. And others are going to have different blips over time as they need to do different things with their workforce and learn more about what makes sense for them in terms of in-person work and what doesn't. Final point, and I'll stop, I promise. On the data piece. Data is challenging in this space, and I'm sure all of you have had this experience as you're trying to look at your own workforce data or your own region's workforce data, not just around how often are folks coming in person, but what is it, how is that linked and associated with all the measures that we care about in terms of performance and health and delivery? One of the things we did in the OMB memo was tell agencies, we are not just looking at how many hours Lauren is spending in the office. We also want to look at how that contributes to the health of your institution and how that contributes to your performance. So that as we're trying to tweak and understand the best policies, we're doing so with those goals in mind and not just a more superficial, how much time are we spending or not. We're making some hypotheses that in-person work is good for certain kinds of things and not as good for other kinds of things. But with that, we want you to measure the health and performance that goes with that. So agencies have done a huge amount of work setting up those systems to report to them on a regular basis, not just the how often do I swipe in, but also what is that, how is that my unit associated with overall performance and delivery? And it's also something that frankly, we're going to get better at over time in terms of understanding how these things are connected. And this is what we see in the broader economy as well, in terms of them thinking through in-person work, flexible work, remote work, and how those are all related to the performance.
I appreciate that. I didn't quite hear if we're at 50-50.
No, I'm sorry. So it's the 80% overall, about 60% of work. I don't want to say that 60%. Let me try that. I would say like around 2/3, a little bit less than 2/3 of work in this area and headquarters is done in person. But every agency is on that kind of that 50-50 path or that balanced path. I would say that they are either have implemented or in the process of implementing, but they're all on different trajectories at this point in time. Some of them finished. VA has like a huge in-person presence right now that they introduced last year. They've kind of that Secretary McDonough has recently written on, and others were introduced their policies over the course of the last few weeks, as you saw with Department of Labor and a few others as they implement over the course of the spring.
Right. Thank you, Director Schulman. Let me turn to colleagues for questions. Mr. Walkinshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just first following up on the tracking question. Yep. Having been involved in some kind of whole of government efforts at the federal level, I find it hard to believe that agencies will get to that 50-50 goal or target, if that's the goal or target, unless there's a really standardized methodology to track and hold accountability toward that tracking. So there isn't like a government-wide dashboard where you're looking at how close each agency is getting to that 50%. And I recognize you're communicating that there's more nuance and complexity into the numbers, but I just don't think you're going to get to any of those numbers unless there's really a comprehensive and rigorous across agency tracking methodology. But one point that I wanted to make that doesn't get a lot of attention, and I think it's a real issue for our transit systems, maybe more commuter rail than metro, but maybe metro as well, and that is the breakdown across the work week of when people are commuting and when they're not commuting.
Yep.
For whatever reason, I don't know, folks like to work remote on Fridays and Mondays. I'm not making any judgment, that's just a fact. And it's a real challenge to run, especially a commuter rail system. I can speak for VRE, Virginia Railway Express. It's a real challenge to run a railroad when you've got to meet peak demand on Wednesday, right? So we've got to have the locomotives, the rail cars, the conductors, the engineers, the platforms, the parking to serve everyone who wants to work on Wednesday. And then they're empty on Thursday, Friday, Monday, Tuesday, and the outer limits of the week. And I think that's going to be a long-term challenge for us. And one thing I would ask for you all at the federal level as our partners to keep that in mind. We've got to find a way to more evenly disperse the days on which folks are working remote and teleworking. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to afford to run commuter rail systems to meet that peak demand on Wednesday as it comes back. Thank you.
Both great points. So I'll just mention two quick things on this. One, not my organization, but the Office of Personnel Management, when we put out this guidance memo to say like, hey, we will want you to especially increase meaningful in-person work. They, in parallel to that, put out a memo to agencies saying, here's how we want you to improve your tracking of a range of different kinds of workforce metrics and data. And here's how we want you to include this in the database. So agencies are doing a more standardized approach to how they're measuring this, which is going to be immeasurably helpful in terms of not only OMB and others, but also our partners in Congress and others be able to see how are agencies doing on their goals? How are they doing on any number of things that are also related to that? Your point on transit is a great one. And this is one we've been throughout the course of the pandemic prior to my tenure at OMB, but also over the last year, been in close contact with our friends at WMATA to make sure that they had a good understanding of here's where we see the workforce going right now. Here's where we see the trends going over time. And as we kind of run into either questions, hiccups, opportunities, we want to stay as closely linked as possible and are looking forward to a partnership because the federal transit, not federal transit system, different part, regional transit systems are a critical part of how we do our work in the federal system. We could not function with the work that we do without the amazing partners that we have. So we want to make sure we reach a sustainable long-term posture with them and are very interested in that ongoing partnership.
Thank you. Let me turn next to Vice Chair Lusk.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First question I have is on the embedded contractors, because I think in many of the agencies, we have situations where you might have embedded contractors that could be 20 or even more % of the workforce. How do we treat them? Is there an expectation that they will be also coming in at the same level or higher level, just out of curiosity?
That's a great question. So we've dealt with a lot of these questions in terms of one-off, but I'll just say what we've offered to agencies as a rule, in that much of that conversation around contractor presence is done in the contract itself or in the ongoing relationship. But it's also something where we know it's not actually valuable for, just as me as an example, if I show it to my office and I'm just sitting in my office and Zooming all day with my colleagues, that's not actually helpful. I'm not getting that value out of that in person. Similar relationship with contractors. If contractors' value is being in the office, collaborating with colleagues, or being a part of that system, then they're going to want to be there, and you're likewise going to want them there. So we should be in parallel looking at the federal work environment and communicating with our partners in the private sector and our supporters there to be able to say, here's our general expectations. I think we're seeing some agencies have moved down a path of setting not only clear expectations about that, but setting better rhythms there. There's a point about making sure we've got the space for everybody is a really important one. But it's one where I think that some agencies are still kind of learning what's the best rhythm for this and how do we best align it. But it's absolutely something that we would expect to see in terms of having that partnership be integrated over time on the contract side as well as the civil service side.
Okay, and then the second question, just thinking about in my district, we have a couple of agencies that are there, but thinking about TSA and the current situation is I think they're probably about 50% vacant in that space in terms of use of the facility, and just trying to understand. I've heard that there might be discussions of having other agencies maybe backfill some of the space. Is that something that you're also considering, I guess, with other facilities as well, looking to bring in different, maybe supportive agencies to those departments that are there?
So I will not answer your question directly because it's another part of my OMB team, but I want to get to the first part of it and say that we should definitely follow up. I think that the work that my team is doing and working with agencies on understanding what is the best work environment is that first order piece that we need to understand. What is it that TSA as an example, but any agency needs and wants in order to maximize their mission delivery, maximize their health? What is the space? What is the footprint? And how does that make sense for them? Well, as we have that data, and that's been improving over time, we're then able to have the conversations around then what does that leave us? Are we in the right facilities right now? Can we combine some of the facilities that we're in? Can we bring in teams on a more collaborative basis? Are there opportunities for us to handle this differently? You see, just as a very different model, our friends at GSA have created federal co-working spaces throughout the country so that folks can come in and be a part of a team, a multi-agency team on a temporary basis as they work together, and also think of other creative models like that. But that my colleagues in the the real estate team at OMB and GSA, they can have a longer conversation about this, but it's a good one. And it's a really big part of why we wanted to make sure we got this work environment planning right, so that we're having a more sustainable footprint for the federal government overall, and one that maximizes our delivery for Americans, but also is more sustainable for the region in terms of our presence.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Lusk. Any other questions? Oh, a couple more over here. All right, Kate Stewart. Yep.
Great, thank you so much for that. And I just want to echo the comments of my colleagues so far and thank Chair Allen for talking about getting our workforce back in the office. I wanted to change directions a little bit and ask about the June 2021 executive order that the president issued regarding diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility in the workplace, in the federal workplace, to strengthen the federal workforce. And I don't know if this falls under your division at OMB, but if you could just speak to that for a few minutes.
Absolutely. So I think first, let me say that I am lucky to have a partial role in this work with my colleagues at the EEOC and the Office of Personnel Management, as well as across all the federal agencies that work in this. But in general, the overall objectives of that was to recognize the benefit of a diverse, accessible, sorry, I'm trying to say it in order this time, diverse, equitable, inclusive, and accessible workforce. And that we benefit as a federal enterprise, we benefit as a nation, we benefit as agencies, and all of the work that we do by working towards that goal. The pieces of that executive order were meant to develop the incentives, the policies, the institutional structures, and other things needed to make sure that becomes not just a policy statement, but one that is embedded in the work that we do every day, so that we have leaders and experts to turn to around how best to execute that we have policies and responsible officials who say that I raise their hand and say I'm in charge of that, and that we have an expectation that senior leaders and institutions are making that a part of their mission every day. This is something where every agency has been reporting and sharing out milestones on this on an ongoing basis, where you'll see the Department of State has recently released some of their own DEI data around this, some of the progress, but also the challenges they face and the opportunity they want to pursue in the future. I lead a body of work called National Security Memorandum 3 on the national security workforce that has focused on not only recruitment, but partnership with institutions across the country to make sure that we are developing the right skill sets and accessing a broader and more diverse population into our national security workforce. So that's the, I would say, intro there, but for more detail, I will both probably need more time and a better group of folks to be able to follow up on your question.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Next I have Ms. Jackson, and then Ms. Randall, were you trying to jump in as well?
Yeah.
All right. I can't see you over there. All right, so Ms. Jackson and then Ms. Randall after that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just back to the alternate work discussion, it would be helpful for me to understand in order to put the 50-50 guidance in context, what the guidance was prior to the pandemic and what the numbers look like prior to the pandemic.
So before the pandemic, the Telework Enhancement Act from 2010 was one of sort of the governing language around telework that gave OPM, not my agency, Office of Personnel and Management, some authorities in terms of setting standards, but delegated to agencies in terms of setting up their overall posture. As best as the numbers are, as good as the numbers as we can get from that time period, in 2019, about 22% of federal work was done via telework in that time period. And that ranges from folks who were doing it 4 days out of the week to folks who might have been situationally teleworking on an ongoing basis. During the pandemic, obviously those numbers went up by quite a bit, where a much larger portion of our federal workforce was making use of those flexibility as well. About, again, 50% of them cannot telework at all. Now, those numbers are going significantly back down as agencies are generally working towards that balance goal of half time in the office and half time before. So the guidance before was much more around agencies, we delegate to you. You have the authority via the Telework Enhancement Act to set up your overall policies of what makes sense. So a lot of folks were eligible for telework, but weren't necessarily executing that because we didn't necessarily have the technology set up. We weren't making best use of Teams and Zoom and other things like that. With the investments and the learning that came from the pandemic, a lot of agencies were able to understand where can we actually deliver more effectively by using remote work and telework, and where is it actually we really need folks to be in the office. So taking those learnings and making sure we're coming up with a posture that is balanced, sustainable, and high performing was what we were trying to take out of that.
Thank you. Ms. Randall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This was fascinating, and I actually think that you're one of the few people I've heard talk about the new work experience post-COVID in more realistic terms, to be quite honest, because I think it is going to be 50-50 no matter what anybody else might want, or I think that's the most realistic thing I can hear. If we're talking about reimagining and revamping the workforce and how people are working overall, I don't know if we can divorce this conversation from a childcare conversation. I know that's a harder one to have right now, maybe not the exact space, but and I'll get the study and send it to Mr. Mercer. I just read a recent study that said most men change jobs because they're trying to get a promotion and do something else. Most women change jobs because they can't find childcare. So whether that's more childcare money that it has to be infused into the system, whether that's federal agencies allowing childcare facilities on their site, whatever that might be, I think it's much harder to talk about women getting back into the physical building without having a childcare discussion. That's a bigger discussion, but I just want to put that in the conversation. So thank you, and thanks again for your presentation.
Absolutely. And thank you very much for that point. It's absolutely critical. And it's one of the reasons that, well, not one of the only reasons, but a big reason that I think making sure we continue to make use of these flexible postures for agencies. And that may be, again, not literally 2.5 days for me and all individuals, but can have that balance be appropriate to the team, to the mission, and to the person is so critical to make sure that we are reflecting that, particularly as folks are able to perform. One point, and this is not the point that you were making, but I think it's really important to say that this general posture that we're talking about is not actually something that is the same as how we might look at reasonable accommodations for individuals who seek out the ability to have an accommodation that allows them to work from home or otherwise due to a disability or some other sort of medical condition. And that is that we're not saying that the 2.5 days a week or 50-50 or balance or whatever it is an agency is doing does not override any of those programs. Those programs continue to be policy and priority for us as a community.
Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Randall. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for your presentation. I just wanted to note that I agree that we're likely not going to see things go back fully the way they were. Life has changed. People's patterns and behaviors have changed. I do think there could be some more transparency in terms of what is the reality of the different agencies, because our municipalities, our jurisdictions have to prepare for the workforce. And as some of my colleagues have shared, whether that means that you have to staff up for trains on particular days, or even there are a lot of restaurants that need to know, am I open for lunch or not? So just having more transparency by agency, even on we are 50%, we tend to do these days. I think that would be very helpful for jurisdictions to be able to plan. And also, if there are plans to make changes, significant changes in office space, that's a lot of what we're all grappling with as well, to have that transparency to know that there's going to be some changes happening along that so we can plan ahead.
Wonderful point, and I'm recognizing I'm over time. Well, if not quite over time, then I need to be able to head off a moment and give away the stage. But I'll just close by noting, I do think that that sort of partnership and transparency is important. I think that having a centralized view is a little challenging because it's not just based on the 24 CFO Act agencies, but they all have offices that have diverse postures across the region. They all, within those offices, they may have teams that do different things across the board. So there's definitely going to be overall trends, but I think that the diversity of that means that it's an imperative for all of us to make sure that we stay in touch, but also that agencies themselves be regional partners so that they continue to have that sort of transparency and partnership and forward-looking approach to make sure that they are sharing with all of you. Here's generally what we're thinking. Here's the challenges that we're running into. Here's where we might be able to work together. And here's where we think that we want to need some of your help. So it's a great question and a great point.
Thank you. And thank you, Mayor Ashton. And I think this is actually your first meeting as well. So not to put you on the spot, but if you want to introduce yourself to everybody as well, welcome to the board.
Thank you, Monique Ashton, Mayor of Rockville, and also serve in a Maryland municipal capacity as District 5 Vice President and representative of the Montgomery chapter. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome. All right. Any final questions? I'm looking up on the screen. I don't see any. All right. Thank you very much, Director Schulman. Thank you very much for your time here as well.
Thanks very much. Wonderful to see you all.
All right, that part of that conversation leads really well, I think, into some of our WMATA conversation. But we're going to move to action item number 10, which we are joined by the WMATA General Manager and CEO, Randy Clark, who is going to help talk a little bit about the revised FY 2025 proposed budget and the financial forecasts for fiscal year 2026. I also want to thank all the members of COG that have been working collaboratively on our COG working group. And again, Kate Stewart's leadership last year in that excellent work, and for everybody who's continuing in that space to really be able to think this through and solve this as a region, recognizing how just absolutely crucial WMATA is to our entire region's future. And I'm stalling for a second while I give him, Mr. Clark a chance to sit down. Mr. Clark, we're going to turn over to you. I know we're going to have some questions and comments after that so that everybody knows after the presentation has finished, I'm then going to move approval of resolution R10 2024, which is supporting increased funding for Metro. So there will be an action item after this. But Mr. Clark, good to see you. Welcome again. Not your first trip here, but we appreciate it. Let me turn it over to you for your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nice trip over on the Red Line as well to come see you all. So I know you all took Metro here today, so I appreciate ridership and your fair compliance. It's a good way to start off, right? So, but anyway, thanks a lot, Mr. Chairman, for having me, members of the COG board, Director Mercer, and I guess I'll start off, and I just want to do really give a kudos to Clark. He has been just an incredible partner and collaborator. We talk, I would say, multiple times a week, and just really appreciate, I think, how close COG and Metro are working, not just on the financial topics, but a lot of things. And that can only continue to bring good things for our region the more these two really important organizations work together. So I appreciate Clark's leadership and collaboration on that. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you. Obviously, we'll talk a lot about the funding aspect here at Metro. But I think I'll highlight a couple other topics as well. Oh yeah, next slide, please. Sorry, I'm already fell apart on my instructions. Figured here we could go through this relatively quickly. Obviously, welcome as much feedback and comments as possible. Some people in the audience or on the dais obviously been interacting with this topic at a very high level, and some a little bit more tertiary. But happy to address any comments, questions, and work going forward. Thank you. But I kind of looked at it this way. We'll kind of talk about the challenge, give you a little where we are mid-year, then really talk about the kind of updated proposed budget and just how we've kind of managed topics, whether it's administrative costs, ridership, fare increase, service tweaks, things of that nature, and then kind of wrap it up a little bit on our capital program. Okay, so overall, this is basically where Metro is. And I guess one thing, as our partners at OMB leave, I will say we've been working very closely with OMB, OPM. I think it's fair to say that we are excited when we see more federal workers on the transit system. So back to the theme of questioning, I think for many people here, we believe that the more people that work together usually believe more collaborative and more productive workplaces. And that's why at Metro, basically everyone is in. And I think that it is a good sign of our progress that we're making there. I will say last Tuesday, I think I'll highlight last Tuesday, we had our highest amount of federal employees on the system since the pandemic. So we had 75,000 people tap with federal cards last Tuesday. So that's continued to go up. That was our highest. It's magic that the first week of the month and on Tuesdays and Wednesdays are the days that we get this. And I think we'd like to see that continue more than just the first week and more than just Tuesdays and Wednesdays. And a little bit to Supervisor Waukeshaw's statement, it is we got to continue to reinforce to everybody that the system is maintained and built to operate 24/7, 365, regardless of how many people use the system. So we are inspecting our tracks and our power systems and our vehicles, whether they're fully loaded or a third loaded, and balancing that across the entire week is really critical. I'll also mention last Tuesday, we had our highest 8 to 9 a.m. peak rush hour since the pandemic. Very important for us, which to us that shows analytically we are building back our base commuters. So we have a lot of seasonality in this region, Obviously, we're not that far from Cherry Blossom. Cherry Blossom is a massive kick of not only just ridership, but economic activity for our region. So building back that base is really critical to then really driving high ridership from there. On this slide, a couple things I'd just highlight. You know, I won't go through the kind of facts and figures of Metro, but the part that I think is really important that we continue to message is within a half a mile of a Metro stop, 60% of our region's population lives. 70% of the jobs in our entire region are within a half a mile Metro. 50% of our employers, 30% of the property value in the entire region is within a half a mile of Metro. It only makes up a third of the actual land of our region and makes up 30% of our tax base. Where Metro goes, the community grows and thrives. And I think you all know that very well. And I think it's really important that we continue to get residents and stakeholders to understand the nexus between our future economic success and stable, healthy Metro. There we go. One thing that we did here, when I got here, one of the things we really talked to the board about is really trying to have a North Star, a true strategic transformation plan that can get everyone on the same page of where we see this organization going. Unfortunately, in Metro, we live rush hour to rush hour, day to day, week to week, and our funding is slightly better than that. We kind of go year to year or every couple of years. I'd like us to actually have a game plan of what we're going to do long term here as an organization, because that means how we're going to be long term as a region. So many people in this room actually were engaged on the Metro process. We had lots of good stakeholder meetings. And one of the things we really try to do is do this in a collaborative, really transparent way. And that resulted in our board passing a strategic plan last April. It really highlights a couple of big themes that I want to really double down on here. We need to become a more modern, more digital-based organization. That is what we need to do, and every day we're focused on that. So to do that correctly means we're going to be much safer, much more reliable, and much more cost efficient. So the term world class is thrown out a lot, right? We do this in America a lot, world class. Of course, that is very vague and allows us all to use that term. So it's more of a political term than I think what it used to be. We can be incredibly world class at Metro. I believe we are the safest, most reliable transit authority in the United States right now. And if you look at National Transit Database, our statistics would prove that. We met or beat every one of our safety goals last year. Our reliability on our rail car fleet was the highest in the United States last year. And we actually led all large systems in ridership recovery last year as well. We have an incredible asset in this region. I used to have the joy of being a pretty high member of the senior team in Boston at the transit system. And I will tell you, a system built in 1890, started in 1897, that was built in a very hodgepodge way. It's amazing how well they run that, considering how great our system was built. Our system was built one way. And that allows us to run an incredible system long term if we have that stability. So the strategic plan is predicated on one thing: predictable, dedicated funding. We cannot do great workforce planning. We can't do great capital planning. We can't do good fleet planning. We can't do good facility planning, let alone expansion and network planning with all of our partners. We can't do any of those things well unless we all have predictable, stable funding. And I think it's really important for all of our regional partners that Metro has that, because right now we got to go to you all, and therefore you don't have that predictability. So at Metro, one of the kind of, I don't want to make it a joke, but it's becoming, we don't have a rainy day account because the jurisdictions are a rainy day fund. And that is not a healthy way long-term to run this critical organization. This is an issue that has been brought up since the late 60s. There's actually a report that I have on my desk literally the year the system opened in 1976 that said the funding model for Metro was broken and it needs to be fixed. And that was a year before I was born, just to put that out there. We need, I think, as a region to finally come together on this. And I think we finally have a transformation plan that will show how that investment can make results. So with that, I want to talk a little bit, about this region and how really important transit is. And we do want to really drive toward this world class. Quite frankly, I think we're going to try to do more learnings from international partners. We need to look like more like Paris and Singapore and Madrid and people like that. If they can do it in Spain, which has a median income about half of what we have in our region, I think we can figure it out here. This is a will and a uniting around a strategy. This isn't a technology or other thing. I always joke there's a robot on Mars drilling for water. We can figure out how to run the greatest transit system in the world if we put our minds behind it. A couple things I really want to highlight here is the crime is down on the system 13% year over year. So we're finally driving crime down on the system. We all know we have a regional issue around crime, and everyone is working hard at that. We can't do that alone. We're in very high partnership with the entire jurisdiction on that. Ridership grew 30% year over year, largest of any transit agency in the country. And again, I showed you some trends of last week. So we're starting to see good growth on our peak and regular commuters. As I mentioned, reliability is up significantly. I'm really proud of our capital delivery team. We executed to almost 99% of our capital budget last year, $2.5 billion, the largest budget in the history of Metro, 99% execution. Almost all of our projects were done on schedule and on budget. We had several projects done ahead of budget and ahead of schedule, which is a big deal. Our Yellow Line Tunnel, over a $400 million project, we actually ended up under budget by 8% and exactly on time, and arguably one of the most complicated projects in the history of Metro. So the team is really functioning very well on that delivery side. I wrap that up by saying, and I try to highlight this a lot, we measure at Metro if we're doing well based on customer satisfaction. And what that means is we have surveying done, so it's all statistically valid, equivalent to lots of people on here are elected officials, equivalent to a poll. And it tells us what customers actually think of how we're performing. And right now, so when I had the opportunity to take over the organization, so a year and a half ago, on the rail side, we were at 68% customer satisfaction. At the end of January, we wrapped up at 88%, the highest in the history of Metro's history. 69% a year and a half ago on bus, and we're at 77% on bus. Does that mean we're where we want to be? No, but we are running a really good system overall. And I think the confidence in the public is back that Metro can be a reliable way to get around. Hence why we welcome our federal employees and everyone else back on the system. I think I'm pointing at the right, there you go. So now let's talk about mid-year progress. So this is kind of where we are through Q2. Thing I really want to highlight here is just the team is really working hard to protect. We have a $95 million carryover from last year's budget. We were able to save $95 million last year. And the only way to actually roll that into our FY25 budget was to manage this year to exact budget so we don't dip into that. So we're managing that very well. We're actually showing through 2 quarters, we're $14 million to the good side of budget. Now that's really hard because the second half of the year spend usually goes up a little bit and we have a lot of special events. But we are trying to do everything we can to maintain service, not drop bus trips, not drop rail trips, and so to manage our overtime and other expenses. So right now we're in a pretty good spot, and we hope to close out the year exactly on budget. Ideally, we'd have a few extra million that we were able to manage to the good on, but most importantly, after two quarters, we're in a pretty good spot. Okay, so the path forward, as many people know, we've had some really important conversations with the region. And again, I want to double down and thank, there's a lot of elected officials in this room, our chief administrative officers from various parts of the region as well. Lots of people working hard on a Metro task force about funding and financials. Want to take a second to recognize our 3 big jurisdictions and coming forward with acknowledging funding. So on the Maryland side, Governor Moore put in his budget $150 million, which is incredibly appreciative. And he actually showed multiple years of projection, which is great. I want to thank Chair Mendelson is in the room with Chair Allen and the mayor. They sent over a letter acknowledging $200 million to help move the DC question forward. And I know Delegate Sickles, I believe, is part of this body. He's obviously wrapped up, I think, in Richmond right at the moment. And I think it's probably better we keep him in Richmond in this particular meeting. But he and a lot of our Northern Virginia colleagues have shown budget amendments of around 130 million. And I know they're working really hard on the FY26 piece as well. So just wanted to really double down and thank on behalf of the WMATA organization, just all the efforts of both elected officials, CAOs, and others that have come together. This slide represents basically the revised general manager proposed budget. The one we put out in December had to have the draconian cuts because we could only really show the money that we had available. We now have more certainty regarding our funding. By no means is this a done deal. Budgets still have to get approved, and until they're inked, they don't exist. But we obviously believe that there's a lot more certainty around Metro funding. So a couple things I just want to highlight here. I won't go through the whole slide, but this is the summary of where everything is. This is predicated on a 0% salary and wage increase at Metro. So that's all non-representative staff, all 689 and all 922 staff. Now those latter two, we're just about to start collective bargaining with the unions, but we are putting in our budget a shared sacrifice for all Metro employees to help balance this budget. It also assumes a 12.5% fare increase. And it actually in net fare increase about 14% because on the weekend, the idea is to have a higher float to a cap. It also has about $50 million of administrative cuts, and I'll talk about those in a second. And then we believe inflation is coming down to a point where all non-labor kind of inflation, so commodities and supplies, we're going to be to the good side a little bit on that. We also have some targeted service cuts of about $20 million, some efficiencies we think that we can bring to the table on delivering service without actually compromising our ridership recovery. The big part we do at Metro is we have a preventive maintenance account. Now, this is federal formula money. Some people know, audience know this topic obviously very deep, but basically it's federal formula money that we are allowed by law to flex a percentage of that into the operating budget to cover costs. But we still have to get all the preventive maintenance work done. So what that means is we use our debt capacity to then rebalance from the preventive maintenance account. It is not a healthy thing to be doing as an organization. Lots of organizations in transit specifically do it from time to time through a crisis. We're clearly in a crisis. So I think it's only reasonable that we do some of that. But I'll explain coming up why that's going to come to crisis here pretty shortly with our capital budget, because in one way, the old saying, you're stealing from Peter to pay Paul, that is probably a pretty good accurate description of what we're doing in one way. So that gives you the overall kind of where we are trying to move with the budget. Sources of funds. So one of the things we want to talk about is revenue. So we are working very hard for revenue recovery. And that's two things. One is actual getting people to pay their fares on the system. I think it's pretty clear since day one, there has been not one topic that has been talked to me more about at Metro than fare evasion. It's the topic everywhere I go. If I have a town hall, internally, externally, stakeholder meetings, elected official meetings, it's almost universally the number one thing people want to talk about. I will say we are making pretty good progress. Where we want to be yet? No, but we're going in the right direction. So we've outfitted new gates. I know you all just came again on the train, so at Union Station, you would have saw our new gates. They are they're going over pretty well and reducing fare evasion. We still have significant issues in pockets of our region with fare evasion, though, that we're working on. On the bus side, we're replacing all of our readers, and that we're about 30%, I think, done of the fleet. We'll be done by the summer of both of those activities. We also believe that ridership recovery should result in a little bit more revenue next year on ridership. And then obviously the fare increase. You put all those things together, we think we can get about 36 million more in actual fares next year back into the system. And that's what we're working hard on. Okay, I mentioned the targeted service cuts, really focused here on a couple things. One, on our peak, and this goes a little bit the Supervisor Walkinshaw statement again, which is we are going to try to only manage a little over a 2-hour peak. We used to be a 4-hour peak, and the idea of a peak is to run more service than the rest of the day. We run an all-day network now, which we used to run at Metro very high peak and not that great throughout other parts of the day. We run a pretty good frequency all the time now, and that's really important. It's kind of the European model, the Asian model. It's what everyone in our industry across the country is trying to do or has already gone to. It means people can truly count on transit when they need it, not just on rush hour. Lots of people don't exist just on rush hour. If we want to truly have an equitable region, people of all types of means have to get around at all types of day, including Saturdays and Sundays and late at night. And our network is designed for that. With that said, peaks are still going to exist. And if we don't have the right amount of capacity for the certain amount of hours, we're going to get into serious crowding issues. So we're cautiously optimistic we can get through the FY25 period with shorter peaks and more 6-car train sets. So this region had a goal to run all 8-car train sets. That was the goal of this region. Massive upgrades in power and our fleet to do that. Now we're going to run more 6-car train sets. Inevitably, that means we are going to get more crowded conditions as the year goes on. And we got to be honest and transparent with the riding public and the public overall that we can't have everything we want unless we have the funding to deliver what everyone says they want. So we're going to have shorter trains and a little less frequency, or the peak will be a little less frequent. But we do think we could probably get by this year with that. We're also going to adjust to holidays. We believe we run too much service for what is the true demand on about 5 or 6 holidays throughout the year. And we're hoping to save a little bit of money on that as well. These are not long-term solutions. I want to just double down. These are not long-term. This is like an FY25, maybe peel a little bit of this in FY26, and then that's it. These are purely stopgap measures to save every dollar we can to be as cost efficient as we can. But if our goal is all to get ridership back to where it used to be, these things are very short-term in nature. 12.5% fare increase plus a 25% on the weekend, but on the weekend we would the proposal is to have a cap of $250. Together that will raise about $24 million in fare increase on that. Did I move it forward? Oh, I did. Thank you. Okay. As I mentioned, I think I skipped one there. There we go. I kind of highlight this before, but it really, double down on the thank you to everyone that has contributed to this. You'll see on this slide, it mentions the 200 from DC, the 150 in Maryland, and the 130 for Virginia. I want to be clear too, we've had serious conversations with our boards on a variety of scenarios. I think sometimes it could look convenient that a number came out and we just backed everyone else's numbers to that. I just want to be transparent with everyone. That's not what happened. It kind of looks that way a little bit because the numbers that we talked about ended up in this way. But we had a variety of scenarios, financial scenarios built that we were talking through the board of what if this, what if this, what if that. And this is one of the scenarios that basically came together. The big point I want to make here, and I do not want to leave this room without making this point. So I've made this very publicly for about 4 or 5 months now, but I'm going to do it again. In FY25, we have a $95 million carryover from our savings last year. We will not have that savings in FY26. So in FY26, we are going to need 95 million more than the 3% growth to be at exactly what we are today. So I want to be crystal clear with everyone. So when we come back next year, everyone can't be saying, well, what happened to, you need an extra $100 million. The $100 million will not exist next year. We have $100 million of federal relief money left because of how we managed last year. That will not exist next year. That means everyone's proportion is going to have to go up, or we're going to have to make cuts next year. Just want to put that really clearly on the record. I know some people have heard that. Sometimes I'm told I'm direct, and sometimes I'm told I'm not direct enough, but I want to be very direct on this one. That's not a thing to anyone in this room, but just media-wise and transparency with everyone, that is a really critical point. I don't think this thing's working, is it? I think I'm hitting it, and you guys are doing so I'll just say next. I caught on what's going on finally. I'm like this, and nothing's really happening. And then I see this little arrow going across. So, so on administrative efficiency, we heard loud and clear from this region, many members on this body. How is it that Metro can look inside its own house before taxpayers and others are helping Metro deliver the service? So we got together, I formed a cost efficiency task force long before actually we were asked to do that. And we are really trying to go through every single detail at Metro. I will say it's not as amazing as people think on potential cost savings on the administrative side. You know, if I had a bunch of CAOs here, I think they'd probably say the same thing. At the end of the day, there's only so many things you can really touch unless you're going to cut core services. 70% of our cost is labor. So, and labor means driving trains and buses and fixing trains and buses and things of that nature. So for us, the only true thing to really manage costs is service. That's the push-pull lever for us. With that said, we believe it's our responsibility to find every single 100,000 or million we can to not actually have to have that service question. So the team is committed to $50 million of reoccurring, and that's a big important number, reoccurring administrative savings every year. Now we have to go execute that this year. That's going to be real hard. I pushed it. Listen, I pushed the team very hard. Not everyone is 100% happy with this, but we are committed to it as a team, and we're going to make it happen. And I'll talk through a couple of highlights of that. We're also really focused on our capital program. We believe we can deliver the capital program about 25 million less on the administrative side. Now that doesn't help us on the operating budget, but it helps put 25 million back a year into the capital program, which is 150 million over our 6-year CIP. So that's a total of 75 million plus the 38 million that every employee at Metro taking a zero. I just want to reiterate to everyone how hard it's going to be for us at Metro to recruit and retain good talent in an unbelievably challenging hiring environment to take zero. It's virtually impossible to hire great IT support right now across this region. And it's going to be even harder when I tell people they can't get a raise for a year and a half. But we are going to do it. Our Metro team is committed to doing this. So whatever pain it's going to be. But that, again, that trick can't be played in FY26. It's just not going to happen, or we won't have a workforce here to deliver the service going forward. Next slide, please. A couple highlights here. The slide's pretty small, but I think this has already pushed everyone, I assume. Yeah, okay, thank you. And it's certainly been online as well. A couple examples of administrative savings. We're going to be doing things like warehouse consolidation, call center consolidation, you know, duplicate, outdated software. We believe there's some money there on the table. We're starting to use advanced drones to do all of our inspections. So all of our aerial structures, we have 3 trained drone operators and crews that are starting to do that type of work. We have some AI pilots going that we think are going to bear a lot of fruit for us as well. We're a highly data generating organization, and now we want to become a highly data use organization. And I just want to highlight those. The last one, and this is really important as we move towards the capital program here, our elevator escalator program, we think we're going to be able to save about $1.5 million next year because we've invested so much capital money in new elevators and escalators, the maintenance on the current assets go down. So it really shows you the push-pull between a really good capital program and then on the operating budget. So if you go to the next slide, please, we'll just quickly highlight the capital program. So in the capital program, we have a 6-year, about $11 billion capital program. 1 year, it's about $2.3 billion. We are actually going to be delivering less of a capital program next year than we did this year. Every year now, it's going to go down a little bit. Our overall need, though, is big. Just like most of you that are responsible for assets in your local jurisdictions. But we need to maintain a safe, modern system to go forward. So we really got to think long-term here about the capital program and the nexus of that and the operating program. Next slide, please. Here are the kind of categories we have at Metro. We kind of put them in buckets so they're easy to understand. I won't go through them all, but you'll see on the right side, these are buckets like rail cars and rail facilities or bus and bus facilities, let alone things like business support. That's a lot of IT and systems, things like that. On the left-hand side is how kind of the revenues of the capital program come together. The debt proceeds is the 2018 dedicated funding that the region worked on. And while that effort was monumentous, I actually lived here at the time. It was an incredible effort by this region to come together. There is one issue with that, and it wasn't indexed. And so that lack of indexing, the 2018 $500 million is already worth about 20% less from a purchasing power than it was in 2018. Our PREA funding, which is the special funding we get from the federal government, again, very appreciative of Congress for that money, and we have to work very hard to secure that every year. Regina Sullivan, as many of you know, is our head of government affairs, and that is a big deal that we fight every year across the country to make sure we get that. That's lost about 30% of its purchasing power since PREA came into effect. And then you can kind of go down the other parts of the funds of how it all works together. Next slide, please. Debt financing, as I mentioned, is really important. We have a AA credit rating. We're not able to get a AAA credit rating, so we have the highest credit rating we can get because we don't have taxing authority. So AA is the highest we're going to have under our current funding model. Basically, really want to highlight one thing here. So if you'll see the last bullet, Metro will not be able to issue new debt starting in FY29 since the debt limit is going to be reached in FY28. So the highlight there is every time we have a budget, and we had to do a little bit last year, now we're going to do it this year. Sadly, we might have to do it next year. We have to pull from the preventive maintenance fund for the operating budget. We are lowering the capital budget because we're using those debt proceeds to backfill. So what that really means is by FY28 into 29, depending on how much we're going to use here this year when it's all said and done, we are out of the dedicated funding helping on the capital program. So we'll still have a capital program. We have federal money plus other sources, but the program effectively, shrinks better part of a 50%. I get the exact percentage, but it's better part of that. Then the delta of backlog of state of good repair issues goes like that really quickly. So we've done an amazing job as a region reducing, not long ago, right? We forget 2016, 2017. It seems like a long time, but it wasn't that long ago. We had track fires every day. We had platforms collapsing. We had old rail cars, an old bus fleet. We are in a much better shape. We really have a pretty good infrastructure right now, but that has to stay on top of it every single year or it quickly gets away again. And I just want to highlight this because we are laser focused on operating budget this year. But the capital budget is equally important in a couple of years. So we might as well all just ground ourselves that in FY28-29, both of those things are going to collide and we have to solve both. There will be no solving one without the other in a couple of years. They are going to have to be solved together. And quite frankly, I think the more we couple them together, it's actually healthier for the region, healthier for Metro long term. Next slide, please. Just highlight 3 quick slides here. How we're activating the strategic transformation plan is important. We actually have action programs. So if we don't have actual things we're doing and measuring the results, then it's just a strategic plan on paper that doesn't really mean that much. So now we're actually saying how are we going to move what we said we're going to do. So on the enterprise side, that really means everything that's not a modal operation. So both our culture, our digital infrastructure, and our overall corporate assets and management. So something we're really concentrating there on is our ERP system. Most everyone has gone through an ERP upgrade. Generally the most complicated and and challenging things an organization goes through. We expect to have a really good program here. We have Oracle on board, who we think is going to deliver really well for us. And it's a good example. We think we'll save about $8 million a year once that new system is on board. We also, and I know this is COG, so I'll take a second to mention, our video system. We have over 30,000 cameras at Metro. We literally work with every police department on a daily basis. Most of our cameras result in clearance rates of everybody in this region. So on a real-time basis, whether it's a train camera, a bus camera, a facility camera, most of the crime in this region we are tapped into to help solve. We're also tied incredibly tightly with the FBI, Secret Service, Capitol Police, and I appreciate Senator Warner and our other senators. Senator Warner's taking the lead on this, are really trying to push OMB and our partners on recognizing Metro's special uniqueness in transit to the national security framework, and how we think that some revenue from the federal government on that cost could be really valuable long-term for Metro as well. Next slide, please. On the bus piece, couple highlights here. I'll use the opportunity to thank DDOT. They've been helping us amazingly with both a pop-up bus lane over our winter shutdown. And I'll have an ask to everyone at the table. If we are going to do a shutdown in your part of the region, we desperately need to work with you all to do pop-up bus lanes. The difference of a pop-up bus lane during a big shutdown is night and day for our customers. We got to be able to move our buses to move those customers if we're going to shut down for several weeks. And therefore, it lowers the overall cost to do the bus shuttle replacement, which then saves more money for the capital program. So you might think about these things as a Metro benefit, but I would argue back and from a team point of view that every dollar we spend on that is actually part of your dollar, and they're also your constituents that we're moving. So it's a team effort here of how do we more cost efficiently move the region around. And then I want to highlight the bus network redesign. We have done extensive work across the region with many of our transit partners in the region. We are ready to activate this year once we have budget certainty. So probably early in FY26. The nuance of that is we believe we'll have to update the Metro formula to actually then do the bus network redesign because the network changes are pretty significant. And there's a lot of conversation about the formula and how that would reflect that. On the rail side, just quickly, I want to highlight that we're moving really working with our partners at WMSC towards automatic train operation. Many people know about that. And we also have our Fleet of the Future. And we got a big event in March on our new 8,000 series rail cars that are being built in Maryland that we'll have more information in the future on. Next slide, please. Summary metrics. This is nothing more than show transparency. This is how we at the organization are trying to run Metro on a daily basis, and it gives you some highlights and statistics we use. And then on the last slide is really just the overall revenue expenses for the FY25 proposed budget, just so it's all in one place so you could see how the revenues and expenses come together. So thanks for the opportunity. I know I kind of got a lot in there, but it's a chance with this many different people in the room to highlight everything that's going on at Metro. So welcome any comments or questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clark. I have a hunch there may be a couple of questions or comments. But I first off want to say thank you. I had a couple of quick comments myself, then one question. I'll start though with a comment really to my colleagues, and that is gratitude for the hard work that folks have done over the last year. The reason why we have these funding commitments for this next fiscal year, I think is really due to the hard work that a lot of you did, both supporting, partnering with executive and legislative branches, making sure that there was a clear deck in each jurisdiction to recognize how important this was and that we had to put this together and to work regionally. There is no other table but COG where that happens. And so I just want to express my gratitude and appreciation. We have a lot more hard work to come, but the only reason we're able to cite those numbers and feel a greater degree of confidence moving into the next fiscal year is because the folks around this table and the hard work you put in over the last year. So thank you for doing that. I also think, and I really appreciate the general manager talking about, we're not anywhere close to done yet. So while we have, the nature of politics, sometimes you hit the crisis, you pat yourself on the back, and then next year we'll be surprised when there's a crisis again. Make sure everyone is full well understanding this is a one-year solution. We are going to have another challenge next year, and especially with the capital financial piece coming, it is incumbent on us to do the hard work of what does a dedicated regional funding look like. That is the long-term answer. That is the only long-term answer. And this group, I think, is up to it. But it's going to be a lot of hard work. I know we'll spend time on this again in the summer with our COG retreat. We'll continue to make this a priority, but just make sure we don't rest on our laurels. We have a lot of hard work ahead. General Manager, just one quick question I was going to ask you, and I'm going to turn to my colleagues. Is there any, can you help us understand, because I know we're all going to have constituents asking us, when they hear a 12.5% fare increase, what is that? The devil's in the details. How does that get spread? Are those decisions not yet made and the board will make those later? Help arm, I think, your electeds here with a little more information about what that means and how they can help answer questions from their constituents.
Sure, yeah, thank you for the question. So 12.5%, basically what that would mean is the base fare that is currently $2 would go to $2.25. And the long distance fare would be capped at $6.75 for a trip. The weekend, the idea is we had this late night and weekend $2 flat fare, and the proposal will be to kind of, if you will, eliminate the flat fare, go back to a cap system late night and weekend, where the base would go to $2.50, would be the $2.25. So if you're still doing a shorter trip, you'd be $2.25 on the weekend, just like you are on the week. But on the weekend, the longer trips would be capped at $2.50. So you wouldn't get capped at $6.50. So you'd still get a pretty significant discount at night on weekends, but we would get some of that revenue back that way. From a process point of view, this is the general manager's proposed budget. We just posted all of our documents for public comment. We have public meetings in all three jurisdictions, and there's virtual as well. And then the board will ultimately approve a budget. Generally, we approve a budget in April.
Got it. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Let me turn to Vice Chair Lusk first.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. I'll say I appreciate the presentation and all the information that you've provided. And I'll acknowledge on the slide that talks about Metro at a glance, just seeing the value and the impact that Metro provides to the region, particularly around the jobs and around the office development and apartments, and just looking at the number of Fortune 500 companies, this is a pretty strong reason for us to all be so engaged. So I appreciate you providing that. That was a comment I wanted to make. And then I also wanted to maybe just drill back down on the service for bus, because acknowledging that there's so many of our more vulnerable residents who use the bus service. And I appreciate hearing the 12% fare increase and what that might mean, but just making sure we're thinking about the impacts for those riders as we adjust the rates, but then also understanding a little bit better how you see the improved service as a result of the efficiencies and the improvements that you're proposing with this effort.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I'm really focused on the bus system. I really like, I mean, I think most people know I'm on the system every day. I do use the rail probably more than the bus, just where our headquarters happens to be is literally on top of a subway station. So that tends to that. I actually use the bus a lot on weekends or later at night, just kind of different type of movement or travel patterns. So I'm very focused on the bus. Today, we'll probably move 400,000 people on the bus system today. It is a big, important bus system. And there's a reason why ridership didn't decrease on bus systems around America. It's because more people that do service work or, what was classified, and I think rightly for a period of time, as essential workers rely on the bus system. So we need to deliver a safe, frequent bus system. We can generally only do that as well as the roads that we move on. So a good example is, I really appreciate again, and I'm not calling out DC, but I'll use this just because there's two people directly in front here, but I do believe.
Go ahead, you can call out DC.
There you go. Like our Clear Lane project that we are doing with the district is very valuable, which is so it's there's cameras on our buses that if you're parked in the lane, you're going to get ticketed. That is a good example of, like, I think most people in DC would agree. We don't want people to get tickets. We just want you out of the bus lane. As an example, we are working heavily with DDOT. We have some stuff in Montgomery County we're doing as well. So, to be around the whole region about bus lanes and dedicated bus lanes. That's really important for us because there's much more efficiency and much travel time savings for our customers. Rear door boarding, we've started on multiple routes to get people on off the bus faster. We have all of our new fleet we're moving through. We got some, obviously electric is a big component of that, but the vehicles themselves are a bit better quality vehicles. We're investing in digital signs at a lot of our stops and stations to get better information. We also created a new integrated control center, which I'd welcome any member that would like to come and see our new integrated control center. Maybe that's something, Clark, that might be a really good field tour. I think really gives an understanding of the complexity of Metro's operation. But for the first time ever, we have a new center where bus, rail, police, everything we do at Metro is in one place. And so bus is getting the daily by minute attention that it probably didn't get before. So that's on the service part. The bus network redesign will take bus to a much higher level. We'll grow ridership. We'll be more cost efficient, and all the customers will generally get a better experience. We're one of the last agencies in the country to really do that. So that we really need to get to do that, and we can't do it without the funding stability. On the fare piece, the base fare will go from $2 to $2.25. Obviously, we need people to pay, right? And that's what we're working really hard on now. I will say, and I think fairness of the room here for larger conversation up for today, we as a region, though, have to come up with a fare policy that works. We are all over the place. We as a region have parts of this region have seniors at this rate and seniors at that rate. And we say kids are free here and kids are half fare there. We have Metro increasing fares and other agencies are going fare free. I mean, if we're going to be honest about the region, the public at large is confused. And we should come up with an actual integrated fare network for our region that we all kind of agree on, and then go out and work on that really heavily. Because I don't care if they're on Metro Bus, a Fairfax connector in your case, or whoever, we need more people on transit. And so we should all be trying to get more people, regardless of the actual, if you will, flag that the vehicles are on.
I'll just say I really appreciate that very detailed answer. And then I'll say I also appreciated the points you were making about public safety as well. So this idea that you're helping us basically address some of the criminality that's in the community as well. So thank you for that point as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me turn to Vice Chair Collins and then Ms. Bailey after that. And then Ms. Garvey, did you have your hand up after that? Okay. Okay.
I'd like to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your presentation. The Maryland General Assembly is grappling over numerous issues, but it appears one that is receiving overall support is the governor's budget and the allocations for Metro. So I think you've sold considerably the importance of what Metro brings to the actual region. And just the numbers in terms of economic impact, I think, is a selling point even for outlying regions. And so within the context of your presentation, I wanted to say how much I appreciate that.
Thank you. Very much appreciated. And we have obviously a lot of members of our staff, live in Charles County. So there's a personal aspect that's not just the service as well, which we're a big employer, and they obviously contribute heavily to their community as well. So thank you for recognizing that.
Thank you. Supervisor Bailey?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Sir, I was here when you first came, and you're doing an exceptional job.
Very kind
in
of you.
terms of, and I want to say that your presentation was great, but also your transparency is great. That's much appreciated, because certainly in our jurisdiction, it allows us to digest what we need to do when we go forward in partnership with you. And so with that, I have only two questions. One is, you mentioned in your presentation about the pop-up business lanes.
Bus lanes, yes.
Bus lanes,
Yep.
excuse me. How do, it's interesting to hear, but how does that teach us how that benefits the region so we can be more in sync to do so?
Sure, great question. So a good example is over the holiday period, and we're going to start doing a shutdown every kind of holiday period going forward. Our ridership is usually about 40% less during just a few days before, if you will, Christmas through about New Year's. I mean, most people, especially in the district, know the region kind of, a lot of people leave the district, right, specifically, and in the region as a whole. So we flexed in and we took care of a critical piece of infrastructure that was failing at Farragut North Station, original beam structure that if left unaddressed would have eventually collapsed and we wouldn't have had the red line, or we would have had to do an emergency kind of piece shutdown. So we worked with all of our partners, and yes, it was disruptive, but we actually ran an incredible bus shuttle. So that bus shuttle, we had probably just over 100 buses on what we call on the line. Working with DDOT, we actually got temporary bus lanes. So there's parts that are already bus lanes, but we had temporary bus lanes. DDOT, MPD worked so closely with our team. We were out there making sure people were not in those lanes, and therefore all those buses can move really quickly. So all the thousands of people that are relying on those shuttles are basically having very little impact to getting off a train, getting on a bus, getting back on a train, which means they are getting around, and therefore the cost of our buses are cheaper, because the biggest cost that we actually have on bus operations is buses sitting in traffic. We have an enormous amount of wasted, someone just sitting there bumper to bumper. We have parts of our region where we go 4 or 5 miles an hour. Right? So the slower you go, we got to pay someone to operate that bus and the fuel of that bus as well. So that's really what it's about. We have another one coming up where we're going to do some significant work on the red line. We have to help assist our partner in Maryland that's building the purple line. And we are shutting down a piece, unfortunately, this summer to support that project around Silver Spring area. So we're already working really collaboratively with Montgomery County and the state of Maryland, and then also DC about how a bus lane would work up in that area as well.
Thank you. And my second question is, when we talk about our federal partners, we all have relationships with them. How do we work in concert with you to make sure, in working with our federal partners, that we're singing the same song, we're getting as much of juice out of that turnip as we possibly can for our region?
Yeah, I say I've never heard the juice of the turnip before,
it's
but
an old term, but go with it.
I'm going to go with that. I like turnips, but turnip juice might be new for me.
Yeah.
But
Orange there.
but it sounds really healthy. Sorry, I lost my train of thought with the turnip juice there. No, usually I'm never speechless. So on that one, again, Regina Sullivan is our head of government affairs, and I should mention Sarah Mayer is with us as well. Sarah is our EVP of customer engagement and experience officer. Our goal here is to work with all of our partners. So we usually have very tight relations with whoever your lead is in your county, your locale, on doing government relations as an example. We want to be as tied together as possible when we go talk with our federal partners, because generally what's good for Metro is good for VRE, is, again, I'm Supervisor Waukesha again, which is good for offices downtown, which is good for tax base, and on and on and on. So I think we do that fairly well. If there's ways we can improve that, just let us know, and we'll double down on that. We actually have government relations staff for both Virginia, Maryland, and in DC that work for Regina, so we can really be on the local level and on the, if you will, the more macro level.
And I think your humor, along with your transparency, has made you successul. So think about juicing the turnip, and you'll be.
Thank you. It's Valentine's Day. I'll tell my wife that when I get home. So thank you.
We like humor. We like humor. All right, just for my friends, we have about 10 to 15 minutes and a long lineup. So you know what I'm saying. All right, Ms. Garvey, let me turn to you next.
Okay, I'll skip the vegetable analogies then. Thank you so much for being here. And I will repeat some of the things my colleagues have said. I mean, I've been listening to a version of this presentation now since you came, and it's getting better, both in substance and actually just in the format and your messaging. Really appreciate it. Thank you for kind of elaborating on the security. I hadn't really thought, I mean, I sort of seen security and thought, yeah, well, and now I kind of understand it better with the elaboration of what you provide. I think that's a really important message. And I think our federal partners should be probably helping to fund that. Good point. Like the idea of the regional fair structure, if we could get to that, that sure would make sense to everybody. I know it's really hard, but you know, your regular customers, like, how come it's so different? They, you know, so great.
Maybe and then we can go maybe to have the same type of sign.
Ooh, you know, that might be, we'll see. That's really exciting. All right, that would be great. A couple of questions for you that you this maybe isn't the right venue to actually ask them, but when I hear your presentations and they're great, you're always sort of preaching to the choir. How are you doing with our friends in the Virginia General Assembly? And is the business community helping you?
Yeah,
like they should. I worry that the business community really benefits from Metro and doesn't maybe support as much as they should oughta.
So I would say, yeah, I think I'd like to think our transparency and actions and trying to drive confidence that we could run a good organization if we have the predictable funding. You know, I'm really proud of our team, and I think our results stand for themselves. Are we going to have some days that are not perfect? Of course. We have 12,000 humans and we have hundreds of thousands of customers, and there's days that aren't going to be perfect. But overall, I think we're running a really good service, and that's bringing confidence. You know, we have Delegate Sickles, Senator Marsden, Senator Serval, lots of people that are working heavily on this Metro topic. I've spent time with the governor. The governor was on the train with me last week. I think he has said very supportive comments as well. I think everyone is coming to the realization that, you know, it's easy to say, and I'm not suggesting any of those individuals, but I think the narrative, say, a year or two ago was, oh, well, Metro's mismanaged. Well, it can't just be every person in the seat is mismanaging, right? There's a structural issue. We also gave a credit, as you all know, to the jurisdictions. And then we had unbelievable inflation, and Metro can't be held in a different level of expectation on inflation than everyone else. So I think once we've gone through all the facts and figures, and the CAO group, I think, has been enormously helpful. And the DC CFO has been part of that as well. And I think that's made a difference. So my confidence has grown significantly on the Virginia side. And I think we're all working in good faith to get to a solution.
Yeah, that's great. And I think the persistence is great. And I will stop there because we've got a lineup. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, I've got Mayor Ashton, Executive Ehrlich, Mr. Sidner, then Mr. Snyder. So Mayor Ashton.
Thank you. I'll just echo the comments of my colleagues in terms of the transparency, the professionalism that you brought to this effort. I know it's not easy and greatly appreciate it. On the order of looking at, and I appreciate also efforts on security, because if people feel safer, they're more likely to ride. So I just wanted to note that. And I know our jurisdictions really appreciate the collaboration and support helping to improve safety. In terms of the 10-year strategic plan that you released in 2022, and I'm looking at like, how do you, in addition to raising ridership, how do you look for other sources of revenue and also reducing cost? In 2022, it talked about potentially looking at housing opportunities, which may bring more riders, but also could bring more revenue to WMATA. Is there a way to accelerate those efforts? I know that there are a lot of stations who could use it, and a lot of us are looking at trying to accelerate transit-oriented development. My second comment is on the reducing expenses side. In 2020, you announced some partnerships in terms of solar and reducing your electricity cost. So I'm wondering, you know, are there ways to move those things faster to help support the budget, issues that you mentioned?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for the question. So maybe I'll start the latter first. So I wasn't here in 2020, but obviously as an organization, we are trying to get into as many renewables as possible. We have, is it 3 garages? I think I'll go with yes. I think it's 3 garages now done for our solar panels. Could be 2 and the third one's about to come online, but I think all 3 are now in on the grid. We are also looking at, and those are done with a private-public partnership and a nonprofit that kind of does that work with us. We want to obviously accelerate that as best we can. I will just give caution that these are always going to be kind of almost rounding errors in the overall budget, right? I mean, when we're talking a $5 billion budget, if we can squeeze another couple $100,000, is it really important to get a couple $100,000 or $1 million? Yes, but it will never move the needle on the overall budget. And so I just want to set expectations that we are going to continue to work on that really hard, but it won't change the structural nature of what we are and what we need to be. On the other one, I think you're referring to our strategic real estate plan. And that was done just before I got here as well. We have a great real estate team. We are actually working across the region on a lot of partnerships. The board has had a good discussion of this multiple times. We want to help you all activate development around transit. And so there is a little, I think sometimes point that we need to clarify, which some people will say, oh, Metro has all this property. We don't have a lot of property. We have a lot of property that has parking lots or parking garages on them. That means that that's property that has to really be capitalized to be redeveloped. Now, we do have some places where we do have, if you will, close to Greenfield, and we're working with Montgomery County specifically on one up in North Bethesda in this whole bio life science center that they're leading. And I think we have a really good partnership that we're doing that. We actually have some in Montgomery County housing that we're working on one as well. We have 2 in DC on some public libraries that we're working on. We're trying to execute with the Prince George's team on the Blue Line corridor. We have a couple, so we're kind of everywhere. If you have an idea that we can flex in and be a better partner, we're all in. And that message has been from board to me, to our team. We just need to understand what you're all trying to accomplish. A lot of these projects just don't pencil at the moment, and that's the problem. We have very high interest rates, high capital construction costs, and then you got to basically either replace our parking or change the parking layout. So some of them work and some of them don't, but we are all in to try to activate these spaces.
Thank you. All right, we got 6 minutes left and 3 more folks to go. Executive Ehrlich.
First of all, thank you very much for your presentation. I thought it was really thorough. Thank you for acknowledging the work we're doing together in Pike and Rose, because I think this is going to be a big difference. I think, I don't think I should have to tell you, but your ability to maintain customer satisfaction is going to be crucial to any acceptance of fares, because usually the complaint is, why am I paying more when it seems like I'm getting less? If you get more and you pay more, I don't find those fare increases outrageous. They wouldn't bother me at all. But if they don't see an improvement in service, then that's all going to be lost. So those 2 things have to go together. 2 things I wish COG would do. One is we ought to set caps on parking in all of the planning, the central district planning areas, so that you can actually drive mode splits that drive transit use. This is like not a new tool. I've only been talking about it in COG for the 12 years I was on the council, and since I've been here. That is a totally reasonable policy to require mode shares that produce more transit riders. We ought to do it. And the second, we ought to wrap ourselves around taxing the private sector within a half mile of the transit stations. They're getting a free ride. They don't pay anything for what's being provided. And it was public investment that made them wealthy. And we should be able to extract some of that. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess just very quickly on that, I'll leave the latter. I think there's a philosophical conversation on that, and I will not dive into that today. On the former, the fare hike, so I will say, 88% customer satisfaction. We kind of pinch ourselves every day. If we can keep that, I mean, we're basically the highest in the country on that. So we are with you that we have to maintain good service. I will just say on the fare raise themselves, it actually lines up with inflation. So we've done an inflation chart, and we'll share it with everyone if we haven't done that, Clark. Since 1976, we've pegged nominal fares for Metro, both average fare, bus fare, long distance fare, et cetera. this fare adjustment will actually get us back into line what inflation would be since 1976. So, all fare increases do impact ridership to some extent, but we do agree that this is not an egregious fare increase. And I think, again, shared sacrifice, if inflation has happened the way it has the last few years, we have to have some type of adjustment.
Thanks. I think Adam Tuss would have loved if you wanted to tackle that second question on camera, but Mr. Sidner.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is, what's consists of a long ride? I probably answered my own question. I came from Laura this morning to come here. Is that a long ride?
Well, on our system, no, it's not to DC. It's anywhere on the system. So if you're in DC going to Dulles, that's a long ride, right? If you're going from Union to Metro Center, that's a short ride. So that's how we just look at it, because it's distance-based system. So it's not about DC centric. It's if you were going from DC to Shady Grove, that's obviously a long trip. And if you're going from Greenbelt to DCA, that would be a long trip.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, a little WMATA insider talk. I apologize for that.
Great, thank you. And Dave Snyder, you get the last question, and then we have 2 more actions we got to take real fast. So, Mr. Snyder.
Absolutely. So as the smallest metro compact jurisdiction, we're very, very strong supporters of everything you're trying to do. One of the things in Virginia, and maybe it's true in Maryland, is making the case to jurisdictions around here, around the table. And I'm wondering if you can help us better make the case. The Northern Virginia Transportation Commission has made the case financially, but going forward, it'd be really helpful for Metro to do some thinking about making the case to outlying jurisdictions, and maybe even jurisdictions that are not directly served by Metro. That would be point number 1. And point number 2, in some of the draconian budgets, you talk about totally closing stations. I think that can be counterproductive in terms of working to get the budgetary issues that we all agree and we're working on resolved. Just 2 quick comments, and thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate those comments. And I'll say from the staff point of view, obviously the revised budget has no station closures in it. We are very focused on, we believe this region actually needs to run more transit service in the medium to long term. We need a network that is more integrated across our whole region. That's one thing. And 2, even on the Metro side, we don't serve people that really need service on things like, say, Sundays and Saturdays and late at night, especially on the bus side, that we really should be doing. But obviously, maybe that really needs to get folded in that dedicated conversation long term. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. And General Manager Clark and your team, thank you very much.
Great. Thanks for having me, everyone. Have a good day.
All right, so what I'm going to do now is move approval. I'm going to make the motion to approve Resolution R10, 2024, which is COG supporting increased funding for Metro. Is there a second? I think I heard everyone at the same time second that motion. I'm going to pick a vice chair. So Mr. Lusk, thank you very much. All right, all in favor of that resolution, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No opposed. Anyone who abstain? Excellent. That measure passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Our next and last item that we're going to be able to get through very quickly is to consider the new agenda item, Resolution R11, 2024, which would urge Congress to not change the slots and perimeter rules at DCA Airport. COG has long supported not increasing the number of flights from DCA and encouraging a balanced regional system between our 3 airports with longer haul flights out of Dulles and BWI. Recently, the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation voted to change and increase current slots and perimeter rules at DCA. So Chairman Phil Mendelson from the DC Council asked the board to take this up for consideration. The resolution was shared by email this morning, and a hard copy was put at everybody's desk to be able to review as well. Actually, I'm going to turn and recognize Chairman Mendelson from the council if he would like to share anything else about his position before I turn it over for any discussion and a vote.
Thank you, Chairman Allen. So I'll move the resolution 11-2024. This came to my attention because of the Senate Commerce Committee's action and a statement that was issued maybe yesterday by the region's 4 senators. And I'm looking at part of that, which I wanted to read, because I'm hopeful that the letter that accompanies this resolution when we send it to the Hill is spiced up and includes some of this. So what they said in part is the DC National Airport's runway is already the busiest in the country, forcing the airport to cram additional flights, and its already crowded schedule will further strain its resources at a time when air traffic controllers are overburdened and exhausted. Last year, the House of Representatives wisely rejected a similar proposal. Acknowledging the physical limitations of the airport, Congress has since 1986 restricted the number of nonstop flights to out of DCA to airports outside of the 1,250-mile perimeter, with Washington International and Baltimore Washington International planned as the growth airports for the region's aviation needs. So there's a reference in this statement, which I think that the COG staff has, that just to pull from that for the letter, that this really hurts the other two airports, as well as adds stress to the already overtaxed National Reagan Airport. So
Arlington, where DCA is located, is pleased to second the motion, if we might.
Thank you very much, Ms. Garvey. All right, so now that we have a second, is there any discussion on this before we move to a vote?
Just really quick, thank you for this motion. Dulles Airport is such an important airport to Loudoun County, to the whole area, but Loudoun County. And we have been dealing with this for a long time, that we're losing flights. So thank you for this. I appreciate it. I absolutely will support this.
Yes. Thank you very much. Any other discussion? All right, seeing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Are there any opposed? And any abstentions? The measure passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
thank you.
We do have an agenda item number 12, any other business. I would say the time is not permitting, but is there any other pressing business anyone wanted to bring up? Seeing none, thank you very much. All right, with that, we are now going to be able to adjourn. I want to thank everybody for participating in today's meeting. We're only 2 minutes over, so great job, everybody. 2:02. Our next COG board meeting is going to take place virtually on Wednesday, March 13th. So I look forward to seeing everybody then. And as of now, we stand adjourned. Thank you, everybody.